I have the privilege to welcome my colleague, friend, and just an awesome all-around person, Catherine Gilliard, Reverend Dr. Catherine Gilliard. How are you, Catherine?
I am wonderful, Danny. Thank you.
You are the superintendent for the Southeast Conference and a very busy person, so I really appreciate the fact that you're taking the time to talk with us and talk to some of our pastors. Let me start by asking you, tell me about a little bit about your history with the Covenant. How did you get involved with the Covenant Church?
So I accepted Christ as a teenager in a Covenant Church there in Chicago, Oakdale Covenant Church. So I was born into the Covenant, I like to say,
Nice.
as a youth. And so I've been steady with the Covenant every place we've moved. If there was a Covenant Church there, I was a part of it. But there were some, periods of time we were living in places where there wasn't a Covenant Church close by, or I didn't know about one that was close by. But been in the Covenant since I was a youth, a long time.
It's been a couple of years, yeah? Yes. So are you a Chicago girl?
I am Southside Chicago girl. Yes, I am.
That's wonderful.
Proud of it, yeah.
I am a Chicago boy, North Side, but still a Chicago boy nonetheless.
I won't hold it against you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And of course, I've been to Oakdale Covenant, which is an amazing church. And of course, Pastor Didero wasn't your pastor at the time. Who was your pastor?
Dr. Jemison was my pastor, Willie B. Jemison. He's outstanding forerunner for us in the Covenant, awesome leader, really has been a part of every pivotal moment of my ministerial career and personal career. So yeah, just a wonderful man.
I have heard so much about him. I'm so sorry that I never got to meet him. Well, my sister, you have held several key positions in the Covenant. Not only have you been a pastor, but also you were the president of the Ministerial Association, or the Ministerium, we call it. Tell us a little bit about that experience. How was it? I know it's busy, but you did that so well. You led our pastors well into our business. How did you end up doing that, and what did you like about that?
So it was really, as most journeys are very interesting. I think the first opportunity that I have to serve in leadership in various places, but the ministerium I was on the executive committee because I was president of ACCW, Advocates for Covenant Clergy Women. And as a part of the executive committee, when the search was going out for a new president, the nominating committee asked me to serve, asked me to allow myself to be put forth as a candidate for president. So that happened by virtue of serving in another place, which put me at the table to be nominated for that role. And leading the ministerium is just an awesome, awesome privilege and honor. Got to know so many wonderful people, had an awesome team of people that I served with. We were leading through some fairly tumultuous times. I had done a lot of my DMin research on difficult conversations, which really helped me lead in that time. And so it was one of the highlights. When I served as chair of the executive board, that was my first highlight that was when the first time the Covenant was moving into a new constitution. We were revising our constitution, and I was serving as the chair of the executive board back then. And so that was a steep learning curve. The ministerium presidency was another steep learning curve. And then, of course, I am the newbie on the Superintendent's Council, which is another steep learning curve. So I guess the lifelong learner aspect of me is kicking into gear throughout my journey.
Tell me a little bit more about your dissertation and having difficult conversations.
So I had been co-pastoring. I started off my pastoral career as a church planter But at this particular point, I was co-pastoring with a young white male pastor, and we were exploring, doing some experimentation around what would it be like for a church to be an authentic expression of God's mercy, God's grace, God's justice, God's compassion. And so it was a church that had been started mostly, by the time I got there, was a mostly white congregation. And we did a lot of experimentation on how could we be formed in a way in which we could be inclusive and welcoming to all people. So it's in a community that has been de-invested. All the resources have been stripped from the community. And we just, for 9 years, we really just had a wonderful experience of having racial conversations, class conversations, gender and power conversations, and all of them hopefully with the goal of our being shaped by the word and led by the Spirit on how we become true, authentic family members of God's body. So some interesting dynamics at play. And eventually I'll get this book that's been on my computer written about how we do this. But I go around and I speak with churches on how to have these conversations, and I lead workshops. I've done a couple at midwinters and that sort of thing, but just to try to help. And this was, 12 years ago. Now we have experts that are doing it all over the place, right? This is the new conversation that we're having on how do we live authentically into who we are supposed to be. But 12 years ago, it was a really new thought, and we were trying to live into it.
That's great. Tell us a little bit about your conference.
So the Southeast Conference is composed of Mississippi, Alabama, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. And it is a relatively new conference. I think the Mid-South is the only one that's newer than the Southeast Conference. And I've been serving as superintendent a little bit over a year. September will be 2 years. So
that's amazing. Can you believe I'm starting my 4th year in September?
I cannot. The time goes by quickly.
That is really amazing. What does a superintendent do? What have you found out?
The learning curve has been steep, to walk alongside pastors to help encourage them, to speak truth where there needs to be spoken, but to help them strengthen their understanding of how authentic communities give expression and life in the neighborhoods in which their churches are settled, and try to uniquely position what that means for each location to begin to be an expression of God's love, God's mercy, God's concern in each place that we have a church. A wonderful group of men and women who are leading in our conference and just want to strengthen their ministries any way that we can pull in people who can help them sharpen what they do, and to build leadership teams that will support the work that God has given to each church to do. That's kind of how I see my job, is to help build effective teams so that the work can be done without anybody carrying more than their load. I think that we're given gifts in the body, and we need to create opportunities for people to grow in their gifts. And so I really like to find ways we can continue to open doors and invite people into the teams that we're creating.
I have enjoyed, because we are friends and because we have a relationship, also being the newer superintendents, just sharing not only frustration and some of our desires, you also to support for one another, and how the superintendents, we belong to the Council of Superintendents, which is the 11 superintendents, plus 3 other executive ministers. Tell me how that has been for you as far as a resource. Have you felt supported? Have you felt, what, I know that I was very pleasantly surprised with that. Tell me about your experience.
So for me, this has been the first team that I've been a part of in the covenant where there has been a woman who has gone before me. And so I spent a lot of time speaking with Evelyn and Tammy. They helped me understand a lot of the nuances in terms of how we lead as well as women. And so in all the other areas, I was the first woman to do why diddy, whatever it is that I was doing. And so, that's to try to figure out a lot of the nuances really is a heavy burden to try to do alone. But this team has already experienced strong women who were leading. And so me coming on board wasn't a new shock for them. They had already had 2 really powerful examples of what that looked like. And also, I think that this is probably the most diverse council that we've had in the history of the covenant. And so that has been wonderful because not only sometimes I was the first woman, I was also the first person who was non-white on a team. And so it's been a joy to be able to be on there with you and Curtis and Greg and be able to have other partners who understand the nuances of how you lead as a non-white person in a majority white denomination, what that feels like. We have had all kinds of side conversations to keep one another encouraged during difficult times and seasons. And so it's been a gift to me. The council has really been a gift to me. And those brothers who are on the council, who have been on there for long periods of time, have done nothing but made space and time available for me to ask all the questions you ask as a neophyte, right? You don't know, so you just ask it, and they've been more than gracious to try to help me along with my learning. So it's been a wonderful experience. It's a really awesome team of people to work with and to serve with and to grow with. So.
Well, I would not classify you as a neophyte in anything, but I understand being somebody new. Do you remember when you and I met?
No. When did we
Or
meet?
when we had our first interactions?
No.
Well, we
it
met.
Seems like I've known you forever, so no, I don't remember.
Well, I know that I know you for a long time because obviously we belong to the covenant and we've both been a part of different teams. And of course, we've seen each other. You've spoken at events, so you have had a very high profile. I didn't do that until maybe a few years ago when I started leading MIPE, which is now called LIPE, the Latino Association. But I remember that being a part of that, I wrote you because we weren't getting some emails and you were just so accommodating. And one time in a ministerium in Phoenix, I was in the meeting and when we were done with business, you called me up to pray. And I was like, oh, okay. And then that kind of made us friends right there. But one of my favorite memories of you has been when we traveled to Alaska to the camp. And you and your husband, Derek, who is a hoot, by the way, just a lovely
Yes.
man who loves to laugh as much as you and I do. And we had a I don't know, 2-hour ride from where we were going to the airport. And I just had such a blast making you laugh and just enjoying life altogether. I certainly remember that. What's one memory that comes to your mind about our time together?
Well, I can tell you that the recent trip that we just took, where were we when we got pulled over by the police?
Oh yeah, Seattle. We were in
Seattle. Okay. So that was a very interesting time and discussion. And again, it was one of those tense moment that we were able to laugh about afterwards as we educated some of our colleagues in the van about what just happened to us and how normalized that is for us as we continue to travel through places where we have to go to be with other covenant leaders.
Yeah. Tell the story though. You're going to leave people without knowing. Tell the story.
Oh my goodness. So we were driving, was it from the airport? Were we going from the airport to wherever the location was, the camp was? And so we were in a van, and I can't remember how many of us there were, but you got pulled, you were driving, and you got pulled over by the police.
Yes.
And this, the policeman he's a really nice guy, but he pulled you over, and then he asked you, did he ask you where you were going, or what were we doing there or something? It was some kind of question that led to you telling him that you were from Chicago.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And that created a bond because he was also from some part of Chicago.
Southside,
and did you name a restaurant? You ready?
Well, I didn't know the name of the restaurant, but Lance Davis, who was sitting next to me, who's also African American, he knew the name of the restaurant. And I remember telling the police officer, we're just a bunch of pastors going to a camp. He's like, pastors, really? And then when he got my license, he said, oh, you're from Chicago.
Yes. And then he leaned in and asked everybody where they were from and then let you go. But it was one of those moments where you're going like, really? You weren't speeding, you weren't breaking, you weren't doing anything that would cause him to pull you over.
I was going a few miles over the limit. Thank you for coming up for me.
We'll keep that apart, but it was really a fun time with you. Yeah. You didn't crack under pressure. You made it humorous, and we laughed all the way to the camp.
Yeah, well, and that leads me to our time of civil unrest right now that a lot of our, that your conference is certainly going through. I know that my conference, the Central Conference, is going through that. And you've always been a gracious leader. How are you walking with people in this difficult time? You have several African-American churches. How are you walking with our people of color? What have you learned from this kind of time right now?
So I think that you know this because your conference probably is structured the same way. Mm-hmm. Those places in our conference where we are really close to people who are really hurting and are feeling the brunt of all of the discriminatory and systemic practices that can continue to marginalize people. Those churches are really doing heroic work in terms of reaching their communities and trying to be God's presence of compassion and justice in their neighborhoods. And it's really self-sacrificing and self-denouncing the way in which they continue to put themselves out and put themselves forward in these times of where we need to be more prophetic in our walk and our witness about who we are as a church and what we believe God would have us to do in this moment. And then I have places in my conference that are a lot farther away from those realities. They're more affluent and their concerns are not nearly as steeped in understanding of why people are protesting the way that they are. And so having those conversations as a pastoral community where we can share about how it's necessary for us not to be so concerned about personal rights as we are about others. I think, Scripture teaches us the otherness of our walk, right? And I think that the second you start proclaiming my anything, you kind of left where the Spirit is really leading in this moment, right? It's all about us. Christ came for us, not for anything that he was doing personally, any personal gain, but God's love for us. And so we should have that love for other people. And a lot of times the conversation just moves away from who we're supposed to be as followers of that Jesus that Jesus who cared about the marginalized, that Jesus who understands equity. We're not talking about equal, we're talking about equity. How do we make things that are wrong right in the world? And so that's the call that, you know, I continue to try to share with our pastors. Our responsibility in this moment is to help people understand God's love, God's grace, but also God's justice. God wants the world to act differently than what we've been acting. We should not be okay with what's going on in many parts of what we have considered normal in the past. But we've been fighting this battle for a long time, and it's just so long that you can keep shouting and no one's listening before it becomes, we become agitated from it. And so I think that a lot of the misconceptions right now as to the way in which the narrative is trying to be spun, that these are riots. They're not riots, they're protests. And the way in which, you know, you're receiving unemployment that pays you more than what you would pay if you were working. Well, the question isn't to cut unemployment. The question is, why would you have someone working for less money than they can make, than you can pay them on unemployment? We spend way too much time trying to answer the wrong questions. And I would love for us to really start focusing in on the questions that need to be answered in this time.
And that's part of the discernment, isn't it? Just being able to focus people to where they need to be focused, and to the love of neighbor, and to, you know, if someone is suffering, it is our duty to do something about that.
Yes.
The other big thing that you know, that you and I have experienced in our superintendencies has been COVID-19, and just had a complete disruption of ministry, where our churches are suffering financially and of course emotionally, and people are not able to gather. How has that been for you as a superintendent? How have you been able to walk with people during that time?
Most of the resources that I'm trying to create for our pastoral community are all about self-care and about mental wellness, because I know that we lead out of who we are. And if we are not taking good care of ourselves, we will find ourselves depleted and trying to lead from a place of lack. And I don't want that for our leaders. I want our leaders to be filled up, even in times where we're being drained with the number of calls that we get from pastors who don't know how to keep their identity in a virtual and digital environment. The weights of the people who the number of deaths that are happening all over, and walking with people through grief and mourning. It's just overwhelming for a lot of people. So having resources that really address self-care, operating as a non-anxious presence, to be okay with telling folks you just don't know, because we don't. All of those are places and ways in which I try to resource our leaders and our churches to help them to understand this is not a time where we're proclaiming what we can do. It's more about a question of what we should be doing. We can do a lot of things, but just because we can doesn't mean we should. And so let's have a time when we're discerning what is it about our witness and our walk that we should be doing right in this moment, and how can we advocate for the change that we need. And you know, we're approaching this time where, you know, the nation and the world has been crying out, because the whole world is involved in the protests that are going on right now. It's not just America, it's the whole world that's really crying out for justice. And it's going to be very interesting. I've been praying for God's Spirit to be so powerfully moving through the church and through the world. It'll be undeniable that God is at work in our midst, because it's just time out for anyone thinking that what we had was enough and what we had was what we needed. we are ready for something more and something different and something new. And we need to be preparing ourselves for that new horizon.
I am so grateful for your leadership during this time, and of course during the time that we met. You have led strongly, with lots of compassion and a lot of care, especially for your pastors. I think they're very fortunate to have someone like you that cares beyond what is really expected. Thank you for that, and thank you for leading the way, not only for people of color, for women, for everyone. You're modeling a way of leadership that's very inclusive, that calls people out of their toxicity and into the light of Jesus. And of course, being a pastor and a preacher doesn't hurt, right? To be able
Yes.
to use for that. So I'm so grateful for you.
Thank
I
you
know
for
that.
the invitation, Danny. I really appreciate being here with you.
Thank you. I also appreciate you being a part of it. You and I obviously interact a lot in different settings, but sometimes I just can't help to smile, because all I have to do is look at you, and you and I know what we're talking about already.
Yes.
When some things are very obvious to us, and I think that that's one of the difficult parts of being a person of color, or a person of different experiences. We see things that some people don't
I
right
think,
away.
yeah, I think when I was president of AMA and you were president of NEPA back then when it was called NEPA,
Mhm.
we had a lot of those moments where we understood the weight that was on our shoulders. And now being the first superintendents in our respective places, although Jerome and Ephraim and Robert Owens all came before me as African-American superintendents, I'm the first African-American woman to hold this spot. You're the first Latino brother to hold this spot. And we understand the weight that's on our shoulders, right? We really want to do well so that the door will remain open for others to be able to be considered. Assimilation it's so loaded with baggage, because we're trying to make sure that our voices are heard in a space that they normally would not be heard, and we want to be authentically ourselves at the same time. So you and I, we try to bring those perspectives into these conversations to say that, just because we're speaking louder doesn't mean we're angry, we're passionate. Just because we are asking questions doesn't mean we're against. We just want more information so we can have a deeper understanding. So a lot of things in the way in which we communicate when we're in our groups and everything, it really is wonderful to be able to look across the room and be able to nod, because we understand what is being said and how it's being said and what we should be doing about what's being said. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for our time flew. I don't know what happened to our time, but we are so, once again, we're very proud of you, proud of your son, Dominic, for leading the way that he's been leading, in case some people didn't know
So
that
proud of
Dominic
him.
is related to you.
Yes.
And your family, just overall,
Yes.
what a great family God has blessed you with. And
Wonderful blessing.
and the work that, of course, you've done to make sure that they continue to be a great family. So I, once again, grateful for you. Thank you for your time. And I will see you soon, I'm sure.
Thank you.
All right, blessings to you.
Blessing.